And these ideas that there's some lost civilization there, it takes away credit from the people that live there,
They're
from
racist.
their ancestors.
And some of them are openly racist. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
Yeah. If you say that they were like, Africans who built the pyramids, or some civilization from alien space, like Eric von Daniken's, ideas like the high civilizations of Peru. They could not. These beautiful structures could not have been made by indigenous people from South America, but some kind of alien, civilization, whatever, or like a lost civilization. In a way, you remove an agency.
Yeah.
And the remarkable sophistication of people from Africa, from Latin America, and from Asia. It's easier for some people to think that it's got to be someone from another planet.
I mean, I think that depends on what you mean by the timeline, or what you mean by civilization even. I do think that there's been an enormous amount of archaeological survey and excavation, and it gives us a pretty decent sense of what happened with humans in deep history and deep prehistory. On the other hand, I think that the public oftentimes is not up to date on what current archaeology actually has to say about that. So, for example, very few people take archaeology at a university level, and so what they've learned as children, for example, that might not be what archaeologists actually think.
Roughly speaking, we have a very good idea of what happened in the ancient past. For instance, if I bring the discussion here to, but there's some changes that may happen, small like adjustments to this general narrative. If I think about, for instance, there's a very big discussion here about the timing of the settlement of the New World, when the first humans arrived here. And here in South America, for many years, people have been claiming that the settlement happened maybe before 20,000 years ago, or even before that. And that's a big discussion, because there's an academic tradition that really established for a long time that there should not have been people here before 12,000 years ago. Some people are saying that, maybe some people are willing to accept that some of the dates for the early settlement go back maybe to 18,000 years, or even a little bit before that. So I think we may have some kind of a rough adjustment. But I mean, the point that I want to make here is that everybody agrees that the Americas was the last continent to be settled by our species. I mean, that's nobody disputes the notion that humankind, the cradle for humankind is in Africa, that our ancestors came from Africa and eventually they settled in Europe and Asia, and then they got here to the New World, to the Americas. We may dispute when the timing of their arrival happened here. But I think it is accepted by most people who do archaeology that, there's a basic notion about the deep human past. It starts in Africa, it radiates from Africa to Asia and Europe, and eventually reaches the Americas and other parts of the world. So what I'm trying to say here is that, I think there's a basic structure, which I think it's given, but we may make some adjustments on it, but I think, the general picture it's given. That's my perspective, at least.
Sarah Parcak, is the structure, the basic structure, solid?
I think generally speaking it is. I think about, human evolution and all the amazing discoveries that we seem to be making almost every week now. And in talking with with our colleagues about, early hominids and how they developed, this idea that there was one morning that one of our, 500th great-grandparents woke up and we were Homo sapiens. That's not true. I think now with seeing it's not a tree of human evolution, it's a series of dense bushes, because new species keep being discovered. And we can't see it as a fixed point in time. It's a long, slow evolution. So sometime more than 300,000, 400,000 years ago, over hundreds of thousands of years, we slowly became Homo sapiens, and yet we have within us Denisovian DNA. We have Neanderthal DNA and other unknown species. All these amazing new discoveries keep being made that change the timeline, maybe pushing it back a few thousand years, maybe a little bit more, but generally speaking, it's pretty solid.
It would be exciting to be the generation that did find something that none of us saw coming. And that has happened in the past. It'll hopefully happen in the future. But I do agree with my colleagues here that we have a pretty good picture of what's going on. At this point, it would be very unlikely to change the story by tens of thousands of years. I think we're honing in on it nicely. And I think that we live in a weird world where people can pop off on the internet and say all sorts of things. And if they say it with a handsome smile, thousands of people will believe it.
Thousands? Millions?
Millions? Okay,
Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, so I have a question for everybody here. So is Graham Hancock an archaeologist?
No.
No.
He doesn't claim to be an archaeologist. But if you look up the bestsellers today on Amazon.com in the field of archaeology, what number do you think Graham Hancock's book is?
Number 1.
It's number 4 today.
Or number 4
But if
today.
you looked it up a week ago, it was number 1.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that this is making very big money. And Graham Hancock, of course, is one of the key people that claims there's a lost civilization from the Ice Age, this kind of advanced civilization. And so there's I think, 2 responses to this. You brought up really well, Eduardo, that one of the claims is we don't know what's underwater because since the glacial maximum, the sea level has risen 400 feet. And so, but the reality is it's not risen 400 feet everywhere. And for example, there's areas with tectonic uplift where there's one tectonic plate going under another and the land is rising faster than the sea. And we can look in those areas and we can do survey and we don't see an advanced civilization. We see hunter-gatherers living there. Or there's areas, for example, you mentioned Canada was under 3 kilometers of ice. Well, that was pushing down the land. And as those glaciers melt, there's less weight on the land and there's something called isostatic rebound. And so the land is rising as fast as the sea. And again, archaeologists have done surveys there and they've not seen any traces for advanced civilizations. But the reality is these people, they go on the internet, they write these books, they go on TV shows, and they try to say that we do not know anything about Ice Age coastlines. And they don't bother to do the research into what we actually know about Ice Age coastlines because they realize they can tell the public, we don't know anything, we're guessing. And that's a real common thing, that archaeologists are just speculating about the past, even though we have thousands and thousands of sites that show hunter-gatherer interactions with coasts in the late Pleistocene period. And so, yeah.
Do you now regret going on Joe Rogan and engaging with Hancock, given everything that
Not at all.
happened
God,
afterwards?
no. I every single day I get messages from people on the internet telling me that I convinced them that real archaeology has its together. I've literally gotten that exact line. But every single day I have people that tell me that I helped pull them out of the cult of fake archaeology. And so there's obviously been a lot of vitriol since then. I have been framed as a liar by Joe Rogan, for example. But, that's Joe Rogan. I'm not interested in what Joe Rogan thinks. I'm interested in showing the general public what archaeologists do, how we come to the conclusions that we come to, and what we can say about the past, and just how fascinating our evidence is and how it provides this picture of humans and what our ancestors were doing thousands of years ago and how we can actually do that. And that's what matters to me. What matters to me is not what Graham Hancock thinks or what Joe Rogan thinks or what they say on Ancient Aliens. It's about trying to educate the public and show them the wonder of our human past.
it still finds some value in what Graham Hancock says and does. You're on the record as saying this. Tell me why.
Well, let me clarify if I misspoke in the past that I do not believe Graham's theories or his conclusions about things, but I am, on one level grateful that he and his and people like him have created this audience that's interested in what we're doing. I see this as a huge opportunity to share the wonder that we at this table share with the actual ancient past that we're seeking answers to. And so this is an opportunity for us to, they have somehow garnered an audience that have the romantic notion that our past is interesting. That's great. Our task is to somehow pull them into more legitimate information.
What is it then about the narrative that clicks and smacks for people?
I think, for one, they don't understand real archaeology. So, for example, Göbekli Tepe is this spectacular site. The monuments there, the art there, it looks really good. And that's what matters. Because what people don't know is there's actually a bunch of sites from the same period that don't look as good, that show the same kind of technology. Sites with T-pillars that were discovered before Göbekli Tepe. Or, for example, at the site of Tel Es Sultan, also known as Jericho, Kathleen Kenyon excavated this enormous tower from the exact same period, pre-Pottery Neolithic B, but nobody remembers that because it's in archaeology textbooks. And what matters here, though, in this sort of cultural milieu is this pushback against scholars. It's this pushback against what they're being told, because right now, anti-establishment narratives are what is popular. And right now, what is popular is pushing back against the scholars or the scientists or the doctors that tell people, well, this is what science shows. And that's what's becoming popular right now, is this kind of conspiracy theory thinking.
So to your point, which I think is a fair one, we need to engage. We need to invite all of these millions of people to join us, because the thing I learned from doing Global Explorer, people are hungry for community. That's really what this is. This is about faith. This is about community. This is about fellowship. This is about finding connection with our fellow humans in a world where we feel lost. We want to be connected to other people. And that's ultimately why I think we're seeing so many people gravitate to pseudo-archaeology, to not real archaeology, because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And we as archaeologists deserve criticism for not broadening the tent soon enough. But it's changing now with work that people like Flint are doing. I was working at a site about 2 hours northeast of Cairo. The site was called Mendes. It's a large multi-period ancient Egyptian site with evidence for over thousands of years. And I was working on a project led by Don Redford and Susan Redford of Penn State University. And we were working on a cemetery complex dating to the Late Old Kingdom, so 4,200 years ago, 2200 BC, the Late Old Kingdom. And I was excavating with my wonderful Egyptian team. We work collaboratively with local people. And as we're excavating and we're digging, we discovered a handle from a beer jar from that time period. And I'm brushing it off because we categorize everything. And as I turned it over, I saw a fat thumbprint. And I was at the time 20 years old. Right, it's my first dig. It's 100 degrees out, sweltering. I don't really know what I'm doing yet. And all of a sudden, it's like I was pulled out of my body. And I had this vision of a large man throwing a pot. And I thought in that instant, who was he? I had this image of him laughing. I had this image of his wife yelling at him to hurry up because the food was ready. I saw the past. It came to life before me in that moment.
My wife tells me, she's a filmmaker, she's not an academic, but she tells me that she cannot stand the smile on my face as I'm getting ready to blow away and be gone for, And it's fun. I mean, if you were, the kind of work that I do in the Amazon, field work is amazing. And there's one thing that we have to recognize, there wasn't any kind of masonry in the Amazonian past. So the kind of archaeology that we do, it's really organic. We work with soil samples. Sometimes we have bone remains and human remains as well, pottery. And so we try to establish some patterns of earthwork, building and stuff like that. But something which is really interesting is that we got to hang out with the people who live in the areas where we work. For instance, I was in the field last month. We're here in September 2025. I was in the field in August 2025 in the Brazilian Amazon. And, I spend my time in the field actually living in the villages of the communities where we work with. So bring your hammock, your mosquito net. You have to, sleep in a hammock every night and share the food and eat the food that the people eat in their villages. Sometimes we're digging places in their backyards. So a lot of the work that we do today in Amazonian archaeology is community-driven work. We try to, to bring together, we try to use archaeologists and the kind of the things that we know about the past. We try to use this information to bring up some kind of important information for the people who live in the territories.
This is such an important point about archaeology being political. And people for years have said, Sarah, why are you inserting politics into archaeology? Why is that a big deal? Just stick to what you're doing. And yet I have sat in congressional hearings where they're discussing whether or not archaeology gets funded. Right now in the United States, history is being erased. Museums, archaeological and cultural sites. Our government is trying to rewrite our history to fit their political motivations. I mean, look at the attacks on the U.S. Capitol, January 6th. You saw Viking motifs. There, all these people online that have millions of followers on Twitter. Who are their avatars? Ancient Roman emperors. We hear Molin Labe, come and get it, right? Repeat it again and again. And I think the greatest threat that we represent to modern politics today is archaeology through its work, through collaborations with local communities, through indigenous communities. We represent the human potential where we could go by looking at the past, by honoring our ancestors, by listening to indigenous communities. We see that we have the potential to get along, to value cultural diversity, to, for 99+% of human history, we did not engage in warfare. We are inherently peaceful as a species. When people hear that number from me, they're shocked. That's what the archaeological record shows us. It shows us what we can do when we engage.
And these ideas that there's some lost civilization there, it takes away credit from the people that live there,
They're
from
racist.
their ancestors.
And some of them are openly racist. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're
Frank.
fine.
Yeah. If you say that there were Africans who built the pyramids, or some civilization from alien space, like Eric von Daniken's, ideas like the high civilizations of Peru. They could not. These beautiful structures could not have been made by indigenous people from South America, but some kind of alien, civilization, whatever, or like a lost civilization. In a way, you remove an agency.
Yeah,
and the remarkable sophistication of people from Africa, from Latin America, and from Asia. It's easier for some people to think that it's got to be someone from another planet.
And every day we have kids from the local villages coming to the sites, and even our Egyptian guards try to shoo them away. And I said, no, let the kids chill. Let them hang out.
Yeah.
We'll talk to them. We pick up pottery. We show them, how things go together, and they're interested. They're passionate, and this is their heritage. I think in many instances, these people, kind of going back to what we said at the beginning, we are living on layers and layers of civilization, or not civilization, groups of people that came before us. So many cities are palimpsests, these layered places, whether it's Istanbul, whether it's Greece, whether it's Cusco, in Peru, which is built on top of the old Inca capital. And we have to recognize that so many people living in places today are still connected to or related to people that came long before. The past is not past. Right? And that's what I think is the core of everything we've been talking about today. It's not removed from who we are. Yes, okay, when the Battle of Actium happened, for 2,000 years ago, and Octavian took over Egypt, I'm still mad at Emperor Octavian, by the way. Really mad. I'm a big Cleopatra fan, big Cleopatra stan. And yet she lived closer in time to us than she lived to the Great Pyramids of Egypt, right? The past is not past. But I think ancient Egypt is still there today. We make jokes about the bureaucracy in Egypt when we're getting our permits or working with the Egyptian government. And I say to my colleagues, think like an ancient Egyptian, right? Do the same thing that a mid-level official would have done to a pharaoh's vizier multi-thousands of years ago, and you'll get to where you need to go, right? So we're all still connected today, and I think we can lose our colonialist lens if we see this broad connectivity, right? The people living onto or next to archaeological sites, working with local people as collaborators, celebrating indigenous heritage, indigenous expertise. And, we can never get away from the fact that we are Westerners, or wherever we're from, working in these places through the graces and goodwill of these governments from around the world. But by going in with a collaborative spirit, by offering tools and technologies and trainings, we can level the playing field, and ultimately we broaden the tent and we get better perspectives about the past.